Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to give some impressions on gameplay of First Monday in October, the upcoming 1 to 4 player strategy game designed by Talia Rosen and published by Fort Circle Games, where you play out the 200-year history of the US Supreme Court. Now, this game is currently in its later stages of Kickstarter. I'll put a link down below to that. And I've also got a gameplay video and an overview video up on the channel. I'll put links to those down below if you want to see the game in action and see the components more closely. Now, in this game, you're trying to win renown by having clerks on the winning side of landmark cases, by influencing the composition of the Supreme Court, and by shifting and adjusting the philosophy of the Supreme Court to one that's more amenable to your overall and overarching philosophical goals. At the end of the game, the person with the most renown points wins the game. Before we get too deep into this video, I do want to thank the US Supreme Court for them allowing us to use this magnificent space. It's a privilege and an honor to be here to do this review and impressions video from this space. I want to offer up some impressions. I'm going to call this an impressions and a light review video because I had a chance to spend about 10 hours with the game. I think I'd have to spend a number more gameplays to give a full review, but I definitely have some strong impressions based on what I've been able to play so far. Let's start out with the theme, US Supreme Court. If you asked me before I played this game, would I rather play a game about the US Supreme Court or would I rather go to the dentist? I'm picking the dentist. Honestly, I am. But then I got a chance to watch some gameplay at SD-HistCon in San Diego. I watched about 15-20 minutes and I realized, no, this has got some really, really sharp gameplay. Now, after SD-HistCon was over, I had the opportunity to work with Fort Circle Games on the Kickstarter video for this game. So this is by way of a disclaimer. However, this content and these words are my own and they have nothing to do with that work. So with that being said, let's finally dig into it. Do I like the game? What are my overall impressions of the game? First up, this game gets a huge thumbs up from me. It overcame my reluctance about the theme. And I would ask you the same thing, that you may be surprised. Even if you hear about US Supreme Court history and you think, oh, that really doesn't interest me. I'm not interested in the topic. I think you might want to give this one a chance. And I'll talk about why for a couple of reasons. First up, reason number one is the outstanding gameplay. I'll dig into this a little bit more shortly. But reason number two is that what I found as I was playing the game was that even though I'm not incredibly interested in US legal history, what this game gives you is not so much a lens on legal history, but a lens on US history. So as you're going through these landmark cases, what you realize is that US Supreme Court case history is very much a prism on what's happening in the US society of a whole. So you've got these fascinating cases that come up, because again, it's 200 years worth of US history that this game encompasses. And so you'll get a case on things like, the one that really blows my mind is child labor. Like the US Supreme Court is making a judgment as to whether child labor is legal or not. And you think, oh my God, where was our country at this point in time to have this be the focal point of a Supreme Court case? So as I was playing the game, I think, again, not so much as that lens on legal history, it was this opening up of just some really interesting aspects of US culture and US history in general that really sucked me into the theme of the game. So stepping beyond the historical theme, what also captured me about this game is the richness of the gameplay. We played, again, a 4-player game. It took us about 3 hours to play through. And as soon as I was done with it, I realized that the game checked off a lot of boxes that I like to see in terms of a good, solid strategy game. First up, as soon as you're done, you're thinking like, okay, what are some strategies to win this game? And you can see multiple pathways towards victory. So in this game, you're trying to influence case law and get your clerks on the winning side of landmark cases. But there's a number of ways you can do that. You can get involved in the case law late, in which case it's going to cost you a lot of your influence and a lot of your energy and effort. Or you can get involved early, but that's going to give other players more time to swing the case law. You can try to be on the losing side at first and then swing over to the prevailing side so that you win in the end by shifting the philosophy of the court or adjusting the views of the Supreme Court and the composition of the court. You can concentrate on dissents and opinions in cases after they're judged. You can try to shift the philosophical goals. And you also have these philosophical cards that you have in your hand, eventually narrowing down to one at the end of the game. And you can get a lot of points that way too. So you can be trying to shift the court composition to match your goals at the end of the game. And you realize you have a lot of different levers and buttons and ways and things you can push and play to try to get that. Toss into that the fact that how your other players are playing, how your opponents are playing can make a huge difference in how you might want to approach the game. So as you're playing the game, you're watching what your opponent's strategies are like, and you can see if you've got a couple of opponents that are really trying to push a philosophy in one direction, you might realize, okay, hey, I'm outnumbered. I've got to find another place to play. My strengths are kind of another strategy to work around. So you really have to morph your strategy dependent upon the strategies of the other players in the game. And on top of everything, as in all good games, you never have enough capacity, strength, time, energy to do everything you want to do. So you have to be extremely judicious, pardon the pun, in terms of how you use your limited actions per turn. Now, we played a learning game too in about 3 hours. I think when you get gameplay down, it's probably going to be more of a 2-hour experience for 4 players. So all of this happens fast. So the game has very good momentum and pace, never gets bogged down. And I probably put the complexity at like a 3 out of 10. So overall, as you kind of look at this game, it's an accessible game, and you don't need to know case law or US legal history at all in order to be able to play this game. I mean, roughly you need to know like, okay, winning side and losing side on a case and clerk and things like that, and how the Supreme Court has 9 members. I mean, just basic stuff that everybody knows. So you can play this purely as a strategy game without needing to know any of the legal history behind it. So everybody really starts out on a level playing field in that regard. So from those perspectives, in terms of the accessibility of gameplay, the pace, the momentum of gameplay, all of the different strategies that you can use, and the fact that it's got to morph around the play styles of your opponents, you get to the end of the game and you realize, I immediately want to play this game. This has got really, really all the components that you're looking for in an outstanding strategy game. So I've gone on a lot about gameplay. I want to talk now about replayability, because that's a very important element, I think, in a game like this. Especially this game has one game, right? There's not a number of scenarios. You're not starting at different points in US legal history. You're just playing this one game. And so are you going to play it 4 or 5 times and you're like, no, I'm not really interested in this anymore. I think the biggest argument in favor of this game having a lot of replayability is just what I was talking about with the quality of gameplay. That's number one. However, there's a number of other factors to mention that I think really make this game very replayable. First up is you're going to have a case palette of landmark cases in each game, and that's going to be different, and the order those cases come up is going to be different in each game. Likewise, the Supreme Court justices that show up in each game are going to be subtly different. There's a certain number of cases that are going to be omitted from every game, and a certain number of justices that are going to be omitted from every game. And even if they're in the game, they might not actually make it to the docket and make it all the way to judgment if they're a case, or they might not eventually rise up to the Supreme Court if they're a justice that doesn't eventually make it to the Supreme Court. So as you're playing the game, each one of these games, in terms of that composition of case law and composition of the justices that are potential candidates for the Supreme Court, is going to give each game, I think, a different flavor and a different feel to it. So there's that element too, in addition to the richness of gameplay, that I think makes this game very, very replayable. A game that this reminds me of a lot, at least of how I've experienced, is the game Obsession, which is one of my favorite games. Similarities here. Obsession is a game where you rebuild a British estate. So you're bringing in prestige guests and trying to rebuild different buildings as part of your estate. It's a topic I'm not incredibly interested in and of itself, although Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorite books. But still, the whole theme of like rebuilding a British estate, it's like, okay. But the gameplay is so rich that it's one of my favorite games. And so that thematic, neutral nature for me and the solid gameplay there's very similar aspects there too. And then that richness of strategy and subtlety of play that's a part of Obsession that keeps me coming back to it is also here, I think, in First Monday in October. I've covered the main points that I want to talk about. I want to talk about 3 more things. The sensitive topic of a game about the U.S. Supreme Court. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about solitaire play. And then lastly, are there any negatives or any criticisms that I might have of the game after what I've seen so far? First up, I think you don't have to worry if you've got friends who are Democrats, Republicans, and you're worried, okay, if we put them together, they're going to end up like having fistfights as they play this game. The game does a very good job of kind of softening and neutralizing the political polarities that might be around the Supreme Court in today's current political climate. A couple of ways it does this is, first up, the case law ends before the year 2000. So a lot of the more sensitive issues that have happened in the last 25 years or so aren't really in the game. Second up, it really doesn't even go red, blue. It's not Democratic or Republican. It uses a federalist or kind of anti-federalist position. Silver and gold are the colors. So it really softens, I think, a lot of those potential rough edges on a game that would lead people from different political views to end up at loggerheads in the middle of a game. A word about solitaire play. There is a solo mode in the game. Unfortunately, I had to send the prototype back before I really got a chance to explore that. I did play solo three-handed to kind of get a sense, to learn the game the first time, and then to check out a gameplay video and to kind of get a little bit more sense on some of the strategies after I'd played the 4-player game live multiplayer. So I did like it that way. I really wish I had a chance to play the solitaire game. I didn't get that. Based on the quality of the multiplayer experience, I think the solitaire experience, I'm cautiously optimistic it will be solid, but I really can't offer up too many thoughts on that. Leslie, any criticisms or wishes or opportunities for improvement that I saw in the game? There is one. I found, I'm coming at the game as someone who doesn't have a legal background, isn't really steeped in US legal history. And while you can play the game fine as a strategy game without that, one of the interesting aspects of that, again, is the history of this case law. And what I found is, in many cases, is that the federalist, anti-federalist, the silver and gold nature of the case law, the sides and some of the history, it was a little bit hard for me. I needed someone to explain it more like I was a 5-year-old, if that's the way to put it. Like, okay, what does it mean for a federalist judgment in this particular landmark case? And I was like, well, I don't really understand, like, who won, kind of thing. Now, couple thoughts on this. One is that the prototype I had doesn't have all of the historical elements that are going to be included, I think, in the final version of the game. Fort Circle Games, if you played some of their other games, I call them sometimes a museum in a box, because they put in so many historical artifacts and they do such a great job of providing supplemental materials that bring that history to life, that I suspect the final version of the game, I won't feel that way when I finally get it and get a chance to play it that way. Having said that, I do think there is an opportunity in the game to really spell it out like you're a 5-year-old for people maybe like me or other people that have a limited exposure to US legal history and might really need things spelled out cleanly and crisply in order to be able to appreciate the US history and the history that the game is focusing on. Those are the big things I wanted to talk about. Just a couple of final thoughts that I know I've admitted in this. The design of the game is spectacular. I really like the color palette and the artistic vision behind the game. The way the game and the user interface is organized is really comfortable and easy to use. I would also say this game very much to me feels like it's a game that has been very tightly wound. And I mean that in a good way, right? That my understanding is this game has more than a 10-year design history, and it feels like that. So I don't think there's going to be a killer strategy that you're going to find after you play the game like 3 or 4 times, or the best way to win. I feel like there is so much subtlety, nuance, and elegance to the gameplay that this is going to be a game you can come back to and keep coming back to. It's that good. I think this gameplay is just outstanding. That's been my experience with First Monday in October. Links are down below if you want to check the game out. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see gameplay of the game in action, I'll put a link over here to that video.